Who was the ultimate political underdog and the first dark horse candidate to ever win the presidency? Earning the nickname Young Hickory due to his association with Andrew Jackson, James K. Polk promised voters he would only serve one term, and he actually kept his word. He was an absolute workaholic who refused to delegate tasks. The immense stress of the presidency aged him so poorly that he passed away just 3 months after leaving office, the youngest age for a president to pass away due to natural causes. What was the work he did during this time? Well, he expanded the United States by over 1 million square miles, he settled the Oregon boundary dispute with Great Britain, he dubiously orchestrated conflict with Mexico, and he achieved every major goal he set and fulfilled manifest destiny, expanding the United States from East Coast to West Coast, fully annexing both Texas and California. Therefore, if you have beef with these states, you can thank Polk. He was a legendary military commander who spent 40 years in the Army before taking the White House, yet most Americans forgot his name. I am of course referring to Zachary Taylor, who was a national hero nicknamed Old Rough and Ready. He fiercely prioritized national unity above all else. He had almost zero political experience before taking office. In fact, after being nominated for the presidency, he didn't realize he was nominated for weeks after. He passed away suddenly in office 5 days after attending a scorching 4th of July celebration. He threatened to personally lead the army against states threatening to secede over his opposition to the expansion of slavery into new Western territories. Though his term was tragically short, his staunch Unionist stance temporarily held back the growing threat of the Civil War. For now. He never actually ran for president, but he signed a controversial compromise that delayed a national crisis by, about a decade. Born in a log cabin in New York, Millard Fillmore taught himself to read and became a lawyer. As vice president, he took over after Zachary Taylor's sudden passing a few days after one very wild 4th of July party. He is remembered as being the very last president from the Whig Party, and he also upgraded the executive mansion by installing the very first bathtub with running water and a kitchen stove in the White House. With his favorite book being the dictionary and favorite food being soup, you can kind of imagine how he was at parties. He signed the Compromise of 1850, which included a deeply controversial malevolent Fugitive Slave Act, heavily angering the North, and he also sent Commodore Perry to open trade with Japan. His attempts of compromise were ultimately futile and destroyed his political party, only temporarily delaying our inevitable national conflict. Who was the only president to come from New Hampshire? If you answered Calvin Coolidge, you'd be wrong. If you answered Franklin Pierce, you'd be correct. Nicknamed Young Hickory of the Granite Hills, showing connection to Polk, who had his nickname connected to Jackson, Franklin Pierce was a Northern Democrat who served in the Mexican-American conflict before becoming a compromise candidate for president. He gave his entire 3,000-word inaugural address from memory without any notes. He and his wife survived a horrific train derailment shortly before his inauguration, which claimed the life of their son, casting a dark shadow and depression over his term. He signed the disastrous Kansas-Nebraska Act, which repealed the Missouri Compromise and led to violent clashes known as Bleeding Kansas, a wild statewide civil conflict. His anti-abolition policies as a Northerner severely fractured the nation and accelerated the path to disunion. Quick! Which president had a mohawk? The one who is consistently ranked by historians as one of the absolute worst presidents in American history. Nicknamed the Bachelor president, he's the only president to never marry and the only president from Pennsylvania. This president is James Buchanan. He served as Secretary of State and Foreign Minister before taking office. Because he had no wife, his niece Harriet Lane served as the First Lady. In his inaugural address, he promised to only serve one term, a promise he gladly kept as the country fell apart. He did absolutely nothing to stop secession after Abraham Lincoln was elected, claiming the federal government had no constitutional power to stop states from leaving the Union. His extreme inaction directly allowed the country to fracture, leaving a massive crisis for his successor and the preservation of America. But he was the only president to have a mohawk. Like, follow, and maybe, just maybe, buy my book Presidential Briefings for $9.99 on Amazon if and only if you like these brief facts and my personal voice. He was a self-taught frontier lawyer who steered the nation through its darkest and most destructive crisis. Known as Honest Abe and the Great Emancipator, Lincoln lost multiple political races before winning the presidency in 1860, despite not appearing on many state ballots in the South, thus leading to the immediate secession of the South. At 6'4", he's the tallest U.S. president ever, and the first to wear a beard. Tragically, he was also the first president to be killed while in office, mere days after the, I'll call it civil conflict, ended. He successfully led the Union through our national conflict, issued the Emancipation Proclamation, pushed for the 13th Amendment, emphasized amnesty, and encouraged Western migration through the Homestead Act. He preserved the United States as a single nation and permanently ended slavery. Who is widely regarded as the worst president by historians, but, in my opinion, is the third worst president. Well, the exact president who revealed what happens when a fiercely stubborn vice president from the opposing party suddenly becomes the president during a national crisis. Nicknamed the Tennessee Tailor because he made his own suits, he was the only Southern senator, except maybe Sam Houston, to remain loyal to the Union during our national conflict. He was also the first president with the surname of Johnson, just definitely Johnson the Lesser. He was entirely self-educated and never attended a single day of school. Because of his clashes with Congress, he became the very first U.S. president to be impeached by the House of Representatives and barely survived. He constantly vetoed civil rights protections, infuriating Congress, but his administration did successfully purchase Alaska from Russia for just $7.2 million, which, given the gold, oil, land, water rights, and the future Cold War, you can't say he's the worst president ever, but you can say he was the second or third worst president ever. He was one of the best American generals ever, but had no political experience whatsoever. His presidency was also rocked by many massive political scandals. I am, of course, referring to Unconditional Surrender Grant. He was the commanding general who led the Union Army to victory, one of the first generals of the modern age, and he was also from Ohio and started a little dynasty for himself. He was famously once pulled over and fined for speeding on his horse in Washington, D.C., but despite the intense financial corruption in his cabinet, historians largely think Grant himself was honest, just maybe not his co-workers. He established the Department of Justice, signed a bill creating Yellowstone as the first national park, and used federal power to crush hate organizations. He fiercely protected civil rights of newly freed African Americans during Reconstruction. Despite this, he still had major scandals that plagued his cabinet and sort of caused a panic of 1873. Imagine winning the presidency in an election so fiercely disputed that rivals nicknamed you his Fraudulency. I mean, in South Carolina, during the election of 1876, literally 101% of the population voted. Rutherford B. Hayes was a Union general who was wounded 5 times in combat before serving as the governor of Ohio. He was the very first president to have a telephone installed in the White House, and his wife was famously nicknamed Lemonade Lucy due to her affiliation with the Prohibition movement, which banned all alcohol from the White House. To settle the dispute of the election of 1876, where Hayes lost the popular vote by 3% and by 1 electoral vote awarded by a Republican majority commission that dispersed disputed electoral votes along party lines, finding that all disputed states should vote for Hayes, led to the Compromise of 1877, officially withdrawing federal troops from the South in good hopes that civil rights would be preserved. They weren't. His presidency officially ended the Reconstruction era, which did not go as Hayes intended. A brilliant president could simultaneously write in Greek with one hand and Latin in the other. If you've watched MatPat, you should know the answer. The one named after the famous cat, of course, often called the Canal Boy. James A. Garfield was a scholar, a Union general, and a dark horse candidate who never actively campaigned for the presidency, but won anyways. He was the only sitting member of the House of Representatives to be directly elected president. Sorry, Ford. But tragically, he was attacked just 4 months into his term and passed away from subsequent medical infections due to his not-so-smart doctor, an understatement, using unsanitized equipment and operating on Garfield, thus leading to sepsis and infection and eventual passing away. Despite his incredible brief time in office, he fiercely challenged the political corruption and the spoil system of Andrew Jackson by advocating for civil service reform. Though his term was cut short, his passing united the country and sparked major government reform laws.